welcome to Brand Politics on iBrandTV. My name is Bennett Joseph, and here on the program, we try to talk about all of the political events playing out in societies in Nigeria, in Africa, and around the world. And Nigeria is still in focus. Of course, Nigeria is experiencing its second recession in 5 years under the Buhari-led administration. But now let us look at the politics of recession and what kind of political structure will allow for a second recession in 5 years within a singular administration. Joining me now via Zoom to put the conversation into context and in perspective is Reverend Father Emmanuel Jefo, a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Abuja and also a social political commentator. Father Emmanuel, it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Great. Now let's dive right into it. Nigeria is in its second recession in 5 years. The first was in 2016, and now we're experiencing the same thing in 2020 under the Buhari-led administration. Of course, yesterday we spoke with a journalist who was able to make sense of what a recession is. But what's your take on the political structure as it currently is right now in Nigeria as to what has led to the second recession in 5 years under the Buhari-led government?
Thank you. I think that many Nigerians, including those of the ruling party, the government in power, collectively agree that we are at a crisis point in our nation. We are at the lowest point of good leadership in our society, in our nation today. And that is clearly reflected in the credentials of those who are leading our nation and in the way politics is organized today. And what we are experiencing with the recession is simply bad politics, but also bad economic management. And the two always go together. Where you have poor leadership, poor governance, you do not expect to have good economic management. You do not expect to have economic growth. And the repercussion is what we are seeing in the poor economic management of our nation, which has taken us into a second recession. These are mere symptoms, I think, of bad governance. The fact that the people who are leading us do not seem to really understand the times in which we are living. And they lack that reflex for learning, because you clearly see that not very many people in government can sustain around issues of governance, around issues of leadership, around issues of the right economic policies that should take our nation to where we really want to be. And what we get are knee-jerk responses to problems and to challenges that are facing us, whether it is with trader money, things that do not really task, that are not intellectually tasking. They just come up with simple solutions by simply distributing money to people, traders, to farmers, and thinking that society will run on a better course that way. No society runs that way. We have to really sit down and identify what our problems are and what policies we need to address our economic and political and cultural and security challenges. And all of this is manifesting itself at a time when we are going through tough security problems in our nation. And we can see clearly that even those who are managing the security of our nation are not the sort of people we can say really have a grasp of what is really happening to us. Whether it is kidnapping, whether it is banditry, whether it is the onslaught of Boko Haram, whether it is with armed militia, with armed robbers. These are clear manifestations of the breakdown of the architecture of governance.
Now, when I spoke with an international journalist yesterday, his name is David Wundenhi, he tells me that it was no longer a case of if, but when, about Nigeria getting into another recession. I'd like to ask you, did it come to you as a shock when it was announced on Saturday that we're now in another recession?
Well, it didn't come to me as a shock. Of course, there's the economic dimension of what generates a recession when there is a significant decline in trade and economic activities over two quarters. Yeah, you say you are in a recession. Of course, this is not a peculiar Nigerian issue, and we must admit that there are many countries around the world that are also experiencing a recession on account of the effect of COVID-19, the lockdown, the reduction in trade and in economic activities. But of course, we see how advanced nations were able to really handle the situation in many of their own countries by significantly committing funds to sustain some minimum of economic activity, even during the lockdown. We didn't have the luxury of that because we have run a prebendal kind of politics where people in power simply take money for their own benefit. And that is why we are unable to pay salaries. We are borrowing from even countries as Brazil, borrowing from countries, borrowing from international organizations to fund our own budget. And at the end of the day, what is being funded is the prodigal lifestyle of the politicians, people in the National Assembly who are not willing to cut down their allowances and their salaries, even in the dire economic situation in which we find ourselves. So this is only a symptom of poor economic management. It didn't really come as a surprise. Well, basically because we are running a system where we have put bad economic managers in charge of our economy, and even bad managers in charge of our politics. So I think that it's sad that this is happening for a second time within the space of 5 years under the same administration. The first time it happened, it was simply because a government came into power and did not take charge of the country in terms of appointing political office holders to be in charge of departments and ministries and agencies of government. Because when you leave things that way, you create uncertainty even in the minds of investors, because people do not know what is happening. They do not know who is in charge, they do not know what is happening, and nobody wants to put their money in a place where there's so much uncertainty. And even when the government decided to put politicians and appoint public office holders into the various positions, we saw that the people who were appointed were just the same old politicians who were being recycled on account of their contribution to the success of Buhari in the election, and not the sort of people who can really move the nation forward. These are tried, tested politicians that are tired. They are tired politicians who cannot move the nation forward. So when people get that perception that these people are really not serious, they're not ready for serious business, then they simply move elsewhere. So all of this is the accumulation of the fact that foreign direct investment in Nigeria is falling. Even Nigerians are not investing in their own country because they cannot stand the uncertainty of the political and economic climate. So, and when all of this happens, then money is not flowing. Unemployment is at a very high level because people have been put out of jobs. Businesses are unable to run. Issues of power generation. These are little issues that just give indications that this economic system is comatose.
Emmanuel, I'd like you to take a listen to the former governor of Anambra State, former Governor Peter Obi, while speaking with Shane Baloyi on Channels Television. He says that although the COVID-19 affected the economy and possibly have led to the recession we're experiencing now, he also believes that the borrowing culture of the Nigerian government has also contributed immensely to a second recession within the Buhari-led administration. Take a listen.
We have gone into recession, and this recession is going to be worse than the 2016 one, because the monies we borrowed to pull ourselves out of the first one was not properly invested. The money we're borrowing today to keep going are not being properly invested.
Now, in the light of those comments made by the former governor of Anambra State, Peter Obi, what are your thoughts on what we actually do with those resources? How much damage do you think that this political character of Nigeria, of regularly borrowing funds, but then not using those funds for the development of infrastructure, how much damage do you think this political negative character has had on what we're experiencing right now?
I think that if we're not careful, by 2023, with the rate at which Nigeria is borrowing, this administration would have sold this country out. Because we have borrowed, I mean, in 2005, we came out of our debt burden when Okonjo-Iweala and the administration of President Olusegun Obasanjo helped us to settle our debts. Now, the administration of President Buhari has taken us back into debt more than we can ever imagine in the last 20 years. And the claim is that monies are being borrowed from international organizations, from other countries to service capital expenditure. But that is not what the money really goes into at the end of the day. These monies are spent, they are shared, and they are spent by the politicians on things that have nothing to do with capital expenditure. Much of it is spent on recurrent expenditure, giving monies, bailing states to be able to pay salaries, and many of them have not even paid up to date. So the point is that we cannot sustain this kind of economic profligacy, a system where we are constantly borrowing money to service our own, the appetites of our politicians. And that is what that is really what we are facing. A few days ago, the train going from Abuja to Kaduna broke down, and passengers were stranded on the rail track. Now, there are security problems in this country, even in that part of the country. So imagine that we are putting the lives of our citizens in harm's way, at risk of bandits and of kidnappers. And this is a train system that has only just come into place in the last few years. But you can see that we cannot even maintain that. And there's somebody who is sitting on the money for the maintenance of the trains, of the rail tracks. But I mean, so this is it's clearly the fact that we have people in power who really do not have the interests of the people at heart. They are only concerned about their own welfare, about their own interests, basically because they don't use this means of transportation. They don't use it. So they do not feel what ordinary Nigerians who have to travel by road or on train are feeling. And so we see that the monies that we have borrowed, part of the borrowing is for the rail tracks, the railway system that we are putting in place. But even what we have put in place already is not working well. So what is the guarantee that at the end of our borrowing season, we will be able to have the basic infrastructure that we need for development to take place in our nation? So it's very sad. It's very sad that this is the situation we have found ourselves in. And I am very pessimistic about this government. I don't believe that anything good can really come out of the government that is currently in power. And it is time that I think that we really need to start working towards a better system coming in the year 2023 in our next election. Because with the way things are going, we are really in big trouble, and everybody is saying it. Everybody is saying it. Even those in power are confused as to how they have found themselves in this situation.
Now, I would like to ask. Of course, we would like to look at what the government's response should be, what the right political structure should be, at least within the time we have up until 2023. What can we do as a people? What can the government do to at least manage the crisis that we are having at this time? But before then, I want to call your attention to the advent and the awakening of the EndSARS movement, which has gained a lot of global attention. And we saw in the UK Parliament yesterday conversations as to how the international bodies and the UK government can come to the aid of Nigeria in terms of helping to curb corruption and those kinds of things. When you look at what the EndSARS movement has done, does it give you an impression that there's some kind of awakening within the Nigerian space of a generation who are beginning to think towards doing things right and perhaps begin to turn and perhaps navigate through the current dialectics in order to bring about a better Nigerian experience?
Well, I think that the EndSARS movement should be considered one of the greatest miracles of contemporary Nigeria, because there are not many people who believe that young Nigerians could gather together, could band together and sustain a movement of that magnitude to push their concerns and their grievances about the way the nation is being governed. And of course, we all know today that the EndSARS movement was not really about, police brutality. It was about police brutality, but that was only a metaphor for the frustrations of young Nigerians with the way politics and governance is organized in Nigeria. And it's about corruption in government, whether it is in the executive or in the legislative arm of government. It is about police brutality. It's about military brutality, because it is not just the police that is involved in brutality. It's about military brutality. It's about unemployment. It's about bad governance. It's about security challenges. So these are all the grievances put together that gave vent to the EndSARS movement. And I think that it's a very welcome development that young people are beginning to take the destiny of their nations in their hands, and that they are saying to the politicians, we are tired of you. We are tired of the way you have run our country, and it is now time for you to give way so that we can take charge of our country. If we are the future of Nigeria, we have to start showing that now and not wait until we'll get old. And I think that in that regard, the message has been rightfully sent to all those who need to hear that we can no longer continue running this country the way we like and think that people will not cry and will not shout out when they think that their rights have been trampled upon. And I think that with the EndSARS movement, we are going to see many, many more young people, many, many youth movements that will rise up towards 2023 and work hard to see that they displace the current order of political leadership and bring in young people who have the skill, who have the knowledge, who have the charisma, who have the energy, and who have the technical know-how to lead our nation forward. And of course, there are many young people within and outside Nigeria, Nigerians who are doing marvelous things, who are doing extraordinary things, whether it is in the computer world, whether it is in IT, whether it is in business, whether it is in the arts, whether it is in politics, whether it is in law, whether it is in sports. Nigeria is a nation of extremely talented young people. And it is amazing how these young people do so well when they leave the shores of Nigeria, but are crippled when they come back home and cannot contribute to the development of their country. So the narrative is changing. And all of this, I think, is a build-up of the Arab Spring movement, that injustice cannot go on forever. A time will come when people will say enough is enough. And that is what young people are saying now, that enough is enough.
Interesting. Enough is enough. It's something we've been hearing lately from the mouths of many young people. And it's really interesting to see, like you rightly said, one of the biggest miracles in contemporary Nigeria. But then again, let's talk about the response of the government. In the wake of the EndSARS movement, we had expected that the government at least would take necessary steps towards helping to manage what was building up at the time and the 5-for-5 demands that was being asked by young people. But when you look at the response of the government, we saw what happened on the 20th of October 2020 on Tuesday night at the Lekki toll gate. We also saw the arrest of some of the EndSARS protesters. We saw the arrest of Mr. Eromosele. We saw the seizing of Mo's passport and those kinds of things. When you look at events like that, I want to ask you, are you optimistic that the government would make the right decision this time that would help bring Nigeria out of recession? And now, if you're optimistic about the government's response, what exactly do you think that response should look like? What should the government do here and now to bring Nigeria out of this recession, which of course is going to have lots of effects on the Nigerian people?
Well, I think we are dealing with a government that has lost touch with the reality of Nigerian life today, with the reality of the situation in which Nigerians are living. And you do not expect much of such a government that is not in touch with the reality of what is happening. At every turn of any challenge in our nation in the last few years, we seem to have been begging the president to speak to us, to address us. During the onset of COVID-19, we were begging the president to come out and speak to us when leaders of various nations around the world are constantly engaging with their people, speaking with them every day and telling them what plans and programs they have in place to curtail the spread of the virus. In Nigeria, we were begging the president. The president took his time before he decided to speak to us. With the NSAS movement, people were begging the president. It seemed like we were begging the president to speak to us. He took his time before he came out to speak to us. And even when he spoke to us, they were not reassuring words that we expected to hear from someone who is the leader of a nation. Instead, he was issuing threats to people that if they protest again, he's not going to accept it. So the point is that I'm not expecting much of the leadership of our nation, especially when they think that any form of outrage or any form of frustration that is expressed publicly is an affront against the government and an attempt to bring down the government. They do not understand that they are running the nation badly, and that people cannot accept that and would have to speak out. So I don't know how long this recession is going to last. Our Minister of Finance has told us that by early next year we'll be out of the recession, but that's empty rhetoric. Tell us how we are going to get out of the recession. What new thing are you going to be doing? Because these are the people who have led us into a first recession and a second recession in the last 5 years. What hope has anybody that they have any new economic idea or any new political idea to bring us out of the recession? So it is almost as if we are banking on all our hopes on God and all our hopes on better times, but the reality on the ground does not support any justifiable hope that we are going to really get out of this recession anytime soon, because you need a conglomeration of different economic ideas and policies to be able to bring the nation out of recession. You must address unemployment. You must address issues of power, people who have to use their profit to run their businesses because there's no public power supply. We must address those issues, and we are dealing, and all of this is happening at a time when the tariff for electricity has been increased, when the pump price of petroleum of petrol has been increased. So how are you going to sustain businesses and economic activity when even small and medium-scale businesses are grounding to a halt because they cannot sustain running their businesses in an environment where there's no power, where there's no energy, and where it is almost impossible now to even make profit? So, and there are many organizations and many institutions that are putting people out of jobs because they can no longer cope with the kind of environment in which the kind of business environment in which they are running. So you need sound economic policy, but you need sound economic managers to be able to put that sound economic policy in place. Very often what we see is a government that is bringing together some economists and making them members of an advisory council or an advisory panel to the government, but that's all that we hear. I mean, the optics, what we just see in public. At the end of the day, we don't hear anything. Some months ago, or about a year ago, the president assembled an economic advisory team that had people like Soludo and a host of other people. But what has become of that advisory team? Even when they give advice, does the government accept the advice that they give? So we're dealing with a government that thinks that it knows everything and really doesn't know anything. And that is why we are where we are today. So if there's any hope that we are going to get out of this recession, it will be hope based on sound economic ideas, sound economic policies. We have to learn from other countries that are going through a similar situation. What are they doing better that we are not doing? And then we have to learn from them. And we have to really cut down on the cost of governance, because more than 60% of our budget is taken up by recurrent expenditure. How do you sustain a government where you are paying people 10 million naira every month, and then the capital expenditure, the work they're supposed to do, is only 2 million naira? How do you run that kind of system? So we spend so much money on recurrent expenditure, servicing the appetite of politicians and the big people in power, and then there's less money to really do the work of infrastructure and economic development. So we need to change the way government is run, and I don't think that this is rocket science. It is not rocket science. We have to cut down. How many cars does a minister need? How many cars does a president need? We have to cut down on that. When you are traveling, how many people need to go with you? These are little things, but they gulp huge sums of money. Peter Obi has said that repeatedly. If you don't cut down on the cost of governance, we will only be living on borrowed time.
Interesting. Your final thoughts now. You're a Catholic priest, and one of those products or services I know Catholic priests and clergymen sell generally all over the world is hope. I mean, in the words of Bishop Matthew Hassan Coker, he says that his hope will never be in recession. And I think that's a common attribute amongst many clergymen. And in the light of hope, what would you like to say to Nigerians at this time as a way of emotionally being able to manage the pressure of being a Nigerian at this time?
Well, I think that many people have been able to make out their daily living, not because of the government, but in spite of the government, because people have learned how to circumvent the government to be able to meet their basic needs every day. So people generate power for themselves, they generate water for themselves, they tar their own roads, and they do everything for themselves, not because there's a government there, but they're actually doing it almost because there's no government. There's really no government. So hope is not built on illusion. Hope must be founded on solid faith. There must be real evidence. There must be real evidence on the ground that can generate hope in us that we should be looking to better times ahead. Of course, we do know that whatever the situation is, we are under the hands of a loving and a caring God, and that God has not abandoned us. He's always there with us, even when things get difficult. So for those of us who are religious believers, and 98% of Nigerians are either Christians or Muslims, hope is a cardinal virtue of our religion. And what hope really says to us that with God on our side, if we do our part, we can hope for a better tomorrow, we can hope for a better future. But that means that while we rely on the grace of God, while we rely on the help of God to help us to get to where we really want to get to, we cannot discount the importance of human effort, because grace does not operate in a vacuum. Grace builds on nature. So there must be a material substratum that grace builds upon, and that is our human effort. That is human cooperation. If we sit down and we are not willing to lift ourselves by the bootstraps, nothing is going to happen. And like I say to Christians, whenever I have the opportunity to preach, we can do all the vigils we want. We can do all the crusades we want. We can do all the whatever, all the vigils, all the crusades, all the revivals that we want to do. If we are not good citizens, if we don't do what is right, if we don't make efforts in wherever God has put us to do what is right, then all our prayers will simply just amount to nothing. So while we pray, we must also work hard. And that means that at our own individual level, everyone must make that commitment to say, I want to be the change that I want to see in Nigeria today. And in that regard, I think that if there's one thing that this government has gotten right, it is the mantra that it has given us: change begins with me. That's a very important principle, even in religion, that if we want to change our society, if we want to change our nation, the change must begin from each one of us. We must embody the kind of nation that we want to see. We must bring on those values, those principles, those attributes, those godly Christian and Islamic values that can help us to build a better nation. So in that regard, we can hope for better times if we are really to take the long walk to freedom. If we're not really to take the long walk to freedom, then hope will simply be in vain. But being a Christian, being a priest, I believe that one of the cardinal principles of our religion is that tomorrow will be better than today, with God on our side and with each one of us doing our parts.
I'd like to stay on that as well. Tomorrow will be better than today. I would like to stay on that as well. Emmanuel Ojefo is a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Abuja and a social political commentator. Reverend Father Emmanuel Ojefo, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you once again for having me. All the best.